I never thought I'd live to write my own obituary, but here I am, scribbling these words on the back of a Christmas card, praying someone finds them before it's too late. The card is tacky, garish even. A cartoonish Santa grins at me from the glossy surface, his red suit smeared with something darker than holiday cheer. My hands are shaking so badly that the pen jerks across the cheap paper in messy, jagged lines. But I can't stop. Not now. Not when I'm this close to whatever comes next. It's freezing in here. My breath fogs in front of me, little clouds that vanish as quickly as they appear. The damp concrete beneath me feels like ice, and the draft coming from somewhere in this hellhole cuts through my thin sweater like a knife. My legs are numb. I don't know if it's the cold or the fact that they've been stuck in this resin for hours. Maybe days. Time has stopped making sense. I don't have long. If you're reading this, you know about the Yuletide Butcher. Everyone does. The Christmas boogeyman. The cautionary tale mothers whisper to their kids when they beg to stay out late caroling. The monster parents dismiss with a chuckle, but secretly double-check their locks on Christmas Eve. 10 years. 10 years of disappearances, and all we ever found were the ornaments. Bloody ornaments. I never believed in monsters before this. Not really. I thought people were the only monsters that existed. I'd seen my fair share of them in my line of work. Cheating spouses, vengeful ex-lovers, debtors willing to lie, steal, and hurt to claw their way out of a hole. I thought I'd seen it all. I thought I understood how dark the human soul could get. I was wrong. I've seen it now. I've seen him, and I know what he does. What he's been doing all these years. I wish I didn't. I wish I could unsee it, but it's too late for that now. It's too late for anything. I glance around the room, though I already know what's there. The shadows don't hide much. The walls are lined with shelves, and the shelves are filled with boxes. Neat, orderly little boxes, all decorated with festive wrapping paper and tied with ribbons. Red and green and gold. Each one painstakingly labeled in perfect handwriting. Names. Dates. It wasn't until a few hours ago, maybe less, maybe more, that I realized the truth. These aren't presents. Not in the traditional sense. I almost laugh, but it comes out as more of a dry, hacking cough. My throat feels like it's coated in ash, and I can still taste the metallic tang of blood. They're ornaments. He's been collecting them, piece by piece, for years. Turning us into his decorations. It's all about preservation, he said. Tradition. I'll never forget the way he said that word, with a kind of reverence I've only ever heard in church. Tradition. I don't know how many he's taken. Dozens at least. Maybe hundreds. And no one ever knew, because he's a genius. A goddamn artist. He doesn't leave bodies. He doesn't need to. Not when he can turn them into... The pen slips from my fingers, and I lurch forward to grab it. My arms are stiff, my muscles sluggish, and for a second, I think I've lost it. But my fingers close around the barrel, and I breathe out a shaky sigh of relief. It's not like it'll save me, but writing this, getting it all out, feels like the only thing keeping me sane. I hear the music again. Faint, tinny, like it's coming from an old record player. Some warped version of Silent Night that crackles and skips every few bars. The kind of song you'd hear in a bad dream, one you can't wake up from. That's when I hear it. The sound that's been haunting me since this all began. The bells. They're soft, almost gentle, like the kind you'd find on a child's sleigh. But there's something about them, something wrong. The jingle is off, discordant, like it's being dragged across broken glass. I stop writing. My heart pounds in my chest, so loud I'm afraid he'll hear it. The footsteps come next, slow and deliberate, crunching against the gritty floor. They're getting closer. My eyes dart to the door, though I know it's pointless. There's nowhere to go. No way to run. Not with my legs like this. Not with the resin climbing higher, hardening like stone around my thighs. He's here. The footsteps stop, and for a moment, there's nothing but silence. Then the bells jingle again, louder this time, and I can hear him humming along with that warped record. "Merry Christmas," he whispers, his voice like a blade sliding across my neck. The last thing I see is his shadow stretching across the floor, long and thin and crowned with what looks like a pair of antlers. I never liked taking missing person cases. 9 times out of 10, They turned out to be someone running away. An angry teenager who slammed the door after one too many arguments, or an adult who decided to skip town and leave their life behind. They weren't the clean, dramatic cases you'd see on TV. They were messy, filled with dead ends, sleepless nights, and distraught families who couldn't accept the truth. But when Laura Wells walked into my office that cold December morning, I knew this one was different. She was small, no more than 5 feet tall, and wore a dark blue coat with frayed cuffs. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her cheeks were raw from the winter wind. But it wasn't her appearance that struck me. It was the look in her eyes. Hollow, haunted, the look of someone who's been staring at the edge of a cliff for too long. "You're the only one who'll listen," she said, gripping her bag with trembling fingers. "The police don't care anymore. They think he just left." But he didn't. He wouldn't. "Who?" I asked, motioning for her to sit. "My brother," she said, lowering herself onto the chair. "Tim." I slid a notepad across my desk, clicking my pen. "Tell me about him. When did he go missing?" She swallowed hard, her lips pressing into a thin line. 2 weeks ago, December 2nd. "Have you been to the police?" "Yes." They took the report, but she looked away, her voice breaking. "They think he's just another missing person, that he left on his own. But he didn't. I know he didn't." "Why not?" Laura hesitated, her hands twisting together in her lap. Finally, she reached in her bag and pulled out a small, clear evidence bag. Inside was a Christmas ornament, a glass ball cracked down the middle, with streaks of something dark smeared across its surface. It was blood. "They found this in his apartment," she said, sliding the bag across my desk, right in the middle of the living room. The police said it was probably some kind of joke or prank, but she shook her head. "I've read about this before. It's him. It's the Yuletide Butcher." I stared at the ornament, my chest tightening. "I know it sounds crazy," she said quickly, leaning forward, "but I've been reading everything I can about him. All the articles, all the forums. This is what he does, isn't it? The ornaments? He leaves them behind for someone to find. It's his signature." I leaned back, tapping the pen against the edge of my desk. The Yuletide Butcher. The name sent a chill crawling up my spine. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The disappearances, the bloodied ornaments, the lack of bodies. But that's all they were, as far as I was concerned, stories. Urban legends. A convenient way to tie together unsolved crimes across different states. "Do you really think Tim was taken by him?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I know it sounds insane. I know how it looks. But Tim wouldn't just disappear like that. He wouldn't. And this," she pointed to the ornament, her voice trembling. "This proves it." Her conviction was unnerving. I'd seen desperation before, but this was different. Laura wasn't just desperate. She was certain. I agreed to take the case. The first thing I did was visit Tim's apartment. It was a small, one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a quiet building. The kind of place you wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it. Everything was neat and orderly, almost too perfect, like someone had gone out of their way to make it look untouched. The ornament had been found on the coffee table, right in the center. The table itself was wiped clean, no fingerprints, no smudges, nothing. The whole place felt sterile. I spoke to the neighbors, but no one had seen anything. No strange visitors, no signs of a struggle. Tim had simply vanished. I spent the next few days digging into his life. Tim Wells was a 28-year-old software developer with no criminal record, no known enemies, and no history of mental illness. By all accounts, he was quiet, responsible, and well-liked by his co-workers. There was nothing to suggest he'd run away. Nothing except the bloodied ornament. As I dug deeper, I started seeing the connections. The Yuletide Butcher had been linked to disappearances across the country for over a decade. His victims were diverse, men, women, children, but they all vanished between late November and early January. The only clue left behind was the ornament, always streaked with blood, always broken. What stood out the most, though, was the lack of bodies. Not a single victim had ever been found. The cases were all classified as missing persons, not homicides. The police had no leads, no suspects, and no answers. The deeper I went, the worse it got. I read about a woman in Minnesota who disappeared from her kitchen while baking cookies. Her family found a bloody ornament on the counter next to the cooling rack. A college student in Ohio who vanished from a library during finals week, leaving a shattered ornament on the table. And a young boy in Wisconsin who was taken from his own living room while carolers sang outside his house. That one hit me the hardest. The boy's parents said they'd only left him alone for a few minutes, just long enough to grab cocoa for the singers. When they came back, he was gone. The carolers claimed they didn't hear or see anything. All that remained was the ornament, lying in the middle of the room. No one had seen or heard a thing. By the end of the week, I was starting to believe Laura. The patterns were too clear, too specific to be coincidence. The ornaments weren't just random. They were deliberate. And Tim fit the profile perfectly. An ordinary person who vanished without a trace during the Christmas season. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was out there. But there was something else that bothered me. In all the reports I read, in all the stories and accounts, one detail stood out. The victims were always listed as missing, not dead. No bodies. No remains. Just the ornaments. The thought made my stomach turn. What was he doing with them? Where were they? And why leave the ornaments behind? I didn't have answers yet, but one thing was clear. If Tim Wells was still alive, I needed to find him fast. And I had no idea what I was walking into. The town was called Evergreen Hollow, and even its name felt like something out of a poorly written holiday movie. The kind of place where the streets were lined with twinkling lights, where shop windows displayed perfect little gingerbread houses, and where smiling kids threw snowballs in the park while their parents sipped hot cocoa. But this wasn't a Hallmark movie. Not even close. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was dipping below the snow-covered rooftops. The Christmas market was the town's main attraction, and the streets were packed with people browsing rows of wooden stalls selling ornaments, candles, handmade toys, and baked goods. From a distance, it was picturesque, cheery even, but the second I stepped into that market, something felt wrong. It was too perfect. Every stall was decorated with meticulous precision, the garlands and bows symmetrical to a fault. The lights twinkled in sync, never flickering or dimming. Even the snow looked staged, its surface untouched by anything but the carefully placed footprints of the shoppers. And the people were the worst part. They smiled. All of them. Wide, unnatural smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They moved from stall to stall, murmuring polite pleasantries to the vendors, their voices soft and emotionless. The kids running through the crowd didn't shriek or laugh. They giggled, but it was high-pitched and mechanical, like a sound effect played on a loop. It didn't take long to notice that every single person avoided eye contact with me. I headed to the last place Tim had been seen, a small inn on the edge of the market. The innkeeper, a heavy-set man in a flannel shirt, greeted me with the same eerie cheerfulness I'd seen in the market. His smile stretched wide as I asked about Tim. "Wells? Can't say I know the name," he said, polishing a mug behind the counter. I pressed harder, showing him a photo Laura had given me. He would have been here about 3 weeks ago. Blonde hair, blue jacket, mid-20s. The man's smile faltered for a split second. "Haven't seen him," he said, quickly returning to his mug. "You might want to check the market. Lots of people come and go this time of year." I thanked him and left, but his reaction confirmed what I already suspected. He was lying. I spent the rest of the day asking around. Vendors, townspeople, even the kids, they all gave me the same response. Polite, but evasive. None of them had seen Tim, or at least that's what they claimed. As the sun set, the market seemed to grow even more surreal. The lights on the stalls cast long, flickering shadows, and the constant hum of Christmas carols began to grate on my nerves. That's when I saw it. A small alleyway at the edge of the market, partially hidden behind a stall selling roasted chestnuts. It wasn't marked and no one seemed to be going that way. But something about it drew me in. The alley led to a row of storage units, their metal doors rusted and streaked with grime. Most were locked with heavy padlocks, but one near the end was slightly ajar. I hesitated, my breath clouding in the freezing air. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to go back to the warmth and light of the market. But I pushed forward, pulling the door open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't strong, just faint enough to make my stomach turn. A sickly sweet mixture of decay and pine. like someone had sprayed air freshener over something rotting. The storage unit was dark, but my flashlight illuminated the space in a narrow beam. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each one filled with small boxes wrapped in festive paper. Red, green, gold, identical to the ones I'd seen in the photos of previous crime scenes. My chest tightened as I approached the nearest shelf. I picked up one of the boxes, my fingers trembling. The tag tied to the ribbon read, Elizabeth Carter, 2017. My stomach sank. That was the name of a woman who disappeared from her kitchen in Minnesota. Her case was one of the first linked to the Yuletide Butcher. I opened the box. Inside was a Christmas ornament, cracked and stained. The glass was smooth, but streaks of something dark, blood, had seeped into the cracks. I placed it back on the shelf, my pulse racing, and moved to the next box. Anthony Ruiz, 2015. Another ornament. I moved down the row, opening box after box. Each one contained the same thing, a bloody ornament and a name. Each name matched a known victim of the butcher. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The air in the storage unit was suffocating, thick with the weight of what I'd found. This wasn't just a collection. It was a graveyard. And then I heard it, humming, low and slow, the familiar tune of Silent Night. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound came from behind me, soft but unmistakable. I spun around, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. No one was there. Hello? I called out, my voice shaky. The humming stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the faint creak of the storage unit's door as it swayed in the wind. And then I saw it, a new ornament sitting on the shelf directly in front of me. It hadn't been there before. I was certain of it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The tag attached to the ribbon read, Evan Ross, 2023. My blood turned to ice. I dropped the ornament, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the unit. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something, a shadow moving in the corner of the room. I bolted. My feet slipped on the icy ground as I ran back to the market, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cheerful lights and music seemed mocking now, their warmth and joy twisted into something sinister. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, shaking. The town, the market, the people, none of it was right. And now my name was on that shelf. The Yuletide Butcher knew I was here. I couldn't sleep after Evergreen Hollow. My head was a carousel of thoughts spinning too fast to get off. The ornaments, the names, the fresh tag with my own name on it. That bastard knew who I was. He was playing with me. I sat at my desk, staring at the cracked ornament I'd taken from the storage unit. I didn't know why I'd grabbed it. Maybe to prove to myself it had really happened. Or maybe because I couldn't leave it there. It sat on my desk like a threat, its jagged edges glinting in the dim light of my office. I felt like I was being watched, even though I was alone. The shadows in the corners seemed to creep closer the longer I sat there. He was out there, somewhere watching me. Fine, let him watch. I opened my laptop, my fingers moving before I could second-guess myself. I posted the video at 3 a.m. The headline read, Private investigator claims to have identified the Yuletide Butcher. Full report to be released Christmas Eve. It was a bluff, of course. I didn't have anything close to a solid lead, but I knew his type. The ornaments, the meticulous setups, the way he taunted his victims. It was all about control. He wanted to be the one pulling the strings, not the other way around. If I could piss him off enough, maybe I could force him to make a mistake. In the video, I stared into the camera, trying to look calm despite the tight knot in my gut. I know who you are, I said, my voice steady. I know what you've done, and I'm going to make sure the world knows too. Christmas Eve, 8 p.m. You have until then to stop this madness, or I'll bring everything into the light. I ended the recording and uploaded it to a throwaway account, then shared the link to a few crime forums and social media groups where amateur sleuths discussed the butcher's crimes. I knew it would spread like wildfire. Now I just had to wait. The package arrived less than 12 hours later. I was sitting at my desk, trying to push through the haze of exhaustion, when I heard the knock. My stomach dropped. No one came to my office without an appointment. I opened the door and found a small box on the floor. It was crudely wrapped in red paper and tied with a ribbon that looked like it had been dipped in something sticky and dark. There was no address, no postage, just my name scrawled on the paper in smeared black ink. I stared at it for a long moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. Finally, I picked it up, my fingers trembling. I set it on my desk and grabbed a letter opener. Carefully, I slid the blade under the ribbon and peeled away the paper. Inside was a handmade Christmas wreath. At first glance, it might have looked festive, with its bright red bow and intricate design. But then I saw the fingers. There were 10 of them, twisted into the shape of the wreath. Each one had been severed at the base and painted with holiday designs. Stripes like candy canes, tiny snowflakes, even a grotesque Rudolph face on one of the nails. I barely made it to the trash can before I threw up. I called Laura as soon as I could compose myself. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense. "Did you find something?" "Yeah," I said, glancing back at the wreath. "Something bad. Meet me at the diner in an hour." Laura looked even worse than the last time I'd seen her. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she clutched a steaming cup of coffee like it was the only thing holding her together. "You shouldn't have made that video," she said after I told her what happened. "I didn't have a choice," I said, keeping my voice low. The other diners were too busy chatting and eating to pay attention to us, but I wasn't taking any chances. He knows who I am. Hell, he knew where to find me. This is the only way to flush him out. And what if it doesn't work? What if he just kills you? Then at least I'll have tried, I said. But I don't think he will. Not yet. He's too careful for that. He doesn't kill randomly. He makes a show of it. He wants control, and I just took some of that away. Laura looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she just sighed. "So, what's the plan?" The lead had come from an unexpected source. After I posted the video, I'd received an anonymous email. It was short, just a single sentence. Evergreen Hollow isn't his only hiding place. Attached was a set of GPS coordinates pointing to a remote cabin in the woods about 20 miles from the town. It could have been a trap, but at this point I didn't have much to lose. Laura insisted on coming with me. "Absolutely not," I said when she first suggested it. "You need someone watching your back," she shot back. "I can handle myself. Besides, if you think I'm just going to sit around while you get yourself killed, you're crazy." I didn't have the energy to argue. We arrived at the cabin just after sunset. It was small and run down, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a horror movie. The windows were dark, but a faint plume of smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone had been there recently. We parked the car a few hundred yards away and crept closer on foot, our breaths clouding in the frigid air. I set up a pair of binoculars on a tripod and handed them to Laura. "You see anything, you tell me immediately," I said. She nodded, her jaw tight. Hours passed, and the woods grew darker and colder. Just when I started to think we'd wasted our time, Laura whispered, "Evan, look." I followed her gaze to the cabin window. A dark figure moved inside, silhouetted against the faint glow of a fire. They were tall and thin, their movements deliberate as they appeared to arrange something on a table. It was him. It had to be. "Let's go," I whispered, pulling my gun from its holster. We stormed the cabin, kicking the door open. "Hands where I can see them," I shouted, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. But the cabin was empty. The figure we'd seen was gone. In their place was an old TV sitting on a rickety table, its screen flickering with static. A VHS tape clicked, and the screen came to life. The video was grainy, but the image was clear enough. A man in a grotesque Santa mask stood next to a Christmas tree. He hummed Silent Night as he hung ornaments on the branches, ornaments made of human teeth. Laura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Before I could say a word, the door behind us slammed shut with a deafening bang. When I woke up, it took a moment to realize I wasn't dead. At least, not yet. My head throbbed, a deep, rhythmic pounding that seemed to echo the muffled Christmas music playing somewhere in the distance. I was upright, but immobilized. My arms and legs wouldn't move no matter how hard I tried. The air was thick, cloying, sweet, and rancid all at once, like pine needles soaked in decay. My tongue felt like sandpaper against the roof of my mouth. The coppery taste of blood lingered on my lips. "Hello," My voice was hoarse, barely more than a croak. The word died in the silence. The darkness was absolute. I strained my ears, hoping for any clue of where I was, but all I could hear was the faint crackle of an old record player and the warped tune of Silent Night. Laura, I sucked in a sharp breath. The last thing I remembered was storming the cabin with her. The TV, that horrific video, the door slamming shut behind us. Laura, I shouted, the word tearing in my raw throat. No answer. I struggled against my bindings, but whatever held me down was unyielding. My arms were tied to the arms of the chair, my legs strapped at the ankles. Even my torso was secured with some kind of coarse, scratchy rope. I twisted and thrashed, the chair creaking beneath me, but it didn't budge. The music stopped, a soft click like the needle being lifted from a record. For a moment, the silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. Each step seemed to echo through the space, closer and closer, until they stopped just behind me. Comfortable? The voice was soft, almost gentle, with the kind of calm that sent a chill crawling up my spine. I didn't answer. The footsteps moved again, circling me. A match flared, and in the brief flicker of light, I saw his face, or rather his silhouette. He was tall, gaunt, with hunched shoulders and thin, wiry limbs that made him look like a marionette barely held together. The dim glow of the match illuminated part of his face, hollow cheeks, deep-set eyes, and the ragged edge of a white beard. He lit a lantern on a nearby table, and suddenly the room was bathed in a sickly yellow light. I almost wished it wasn't. The room, if you could call it that, was a nightmare made flesh. The walls were lined with strings of what at first looked like garlands, but were unmistakably intestines, knotted and stretched. Stockings hung from hooks in the corners, their patchwork material clearly human skin. The floor was sticky beneath the chair, coated in a dark, tarry substance I didn't want to think about. The centerpiece, though, was the table in the center of the room. Tools of every kind lay scattered across it. Knives, pliers, paintbrushes, and jars filled with resin. Among them were bones, polished and gleaming, some shaped into tiny ornaments with delicate hooks attached. And there he stood, his tattered Santa suit hanging off his thin frame like a forgotten costume. The red fabric was frayed and stained, the white trim darkened with old blood. His beard, long and stringy, dripped onto his chest as he leaned toward me with a smile that didn't belong on any human face. "So nice of you to join me," he said. His voice was calm, almost soothing, like he was welcoming me into his home for a holiday dinner. "What the hell is this?" I spat, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "Where's Laura?" His smile widened, the corners of his mouth stretching unnaturally far. He ignored my question, stepping to the table and picking up a paintbrush coated in crimson. "Do you know what Christmas is really about?" he asked, his tone conversational, like we were old friends catching up over coffee. I didn't answer. "Tradition," he said, twirling the paintbrush between his fingers. "Preservation. Taking something fleeting and making it last forever. That's what Christmas is, don't you think? We take trees, already dead, and dress them up. Adorn them with memories, with meaning. And in doing so, we make them beautiful." I couldn't tear my eyes away as he dipped the brush into a small jar and smeared something thick and glistening onto a shard of bone. "You're insane," I whispered. "No," he said softly, shaking his head. "I'm a craftsman." He gestured toward the far wall, where a towering Christmas tree stood. At first, it looked ordinary, if a bit grotesque, its branches heavy with ornaments. But as my eyes adjusted, the truth hit me like a freight train. The ornaments weren't ornaments at all. They were remains, shriveled hands encased in resin, their skin mottled and gray, dangled from hooks. Teeth were arranged in delicate circles, strung together like pearls. Bones, ribs, fingers, femurs had been carved and painted to look festive, their once horrific origins masked by glitter and bright colors. At the very top of the tree was a star, or so I thought. But as I stared, I realized it wasn't a star at all. It was a face. Laura's face. I couldn't stop the scream that tore from my throat. Her expression was frozen in a mix of terror and agony, her eyes clouded and glassy. Her body had been twisted, her arms bent upward like wings, her torso contorted into the grotesque shape of an angel. She was exquisite, the butcher said, his voice tinged with pride. Such spirit, such fire. But even she had to be preserved. It's the only way to honor them, you see, to make them permanent. You sick bastard, I roared, straining against the ropes. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of quiet disappointment. You don't understand, he said softly, almost sadly. But you will. He set down the paintbrush and picked up a long, thin blade. The lantern's light reflected off the steel as he turned it over in his hands. I have plans for you, Evan, he said, stepping closer. You'll be my greatest work yet, a centerpiece for my next tree, something truly unforgettable. I thrashed against the ropes, the chair creaking beneath me, but it was no use. Don't worry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is only the beginning. The first thing I noticed was the numbness in my legs. I couldn't feel anything below my waist. Not pain, not even the cold air of the basement. At first, I thought it was the adrenaline or shock, but when I glanced down, I understood the truth. My legs weren't mine anymore. They were encased in a thick, glassy resin, the kind I'd seen covering the ornaments on his tree. It glistened in the dim light of the lantern, still tacky in places, like it was slowly hardening around me. The resin clung to my skin, creeping higher toward my hips, locking me in place. I yanked at my arms, desperate to break free, but the ropes dug into my wrists, biting through the skin. My breathing came fast and shallow, panic rising with every second. Behind me, the butcher chuckled softly. You're fighting it, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. They all do at first, but you'll see, it's better this way. Once the resin sets, you won't feel anything. No pain, no fear, just permanence. Go to hell? I spat, thrashing harder against the ropes. He knelt in front of me, tilting his head like a curious predator. His hollow cheeks and sunken eyes looked almost skeletal in the flickering lantern light. Up close, I could see the patches of dried blood staining his tattered Santa suit. No need to be rude, Evan, he said, as if scolding a misbehaving child. He tapped the resin encasing my legs with one long, bony finger. You'll make a fine addition to the collection. A detective ornament. That's what you are, after all. A man who thought he could solve the puzzle, catch the bad guy. And you almost did. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. Almost. I clenched my jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. The butcher straightened, walking to the workbench and picking up a thin paintbrush. He twirled it between his fingers as he spoke, his tone unnervingly calm. You've done me a great service, you know. That video of yours? It's brought attention to my work. A spotlight. And I have to admit, I've always enjoyed a little audience participation. He dipped the brush into a jar of red paint, or was it blood, and turned back to me. Now let's get started. You'll look wonderful in gold, I think. A nice, regal touch for the tree. He reached for my face, and that's when I saw it. A shard of broken glass lying just a few feet away, half hidden in the sticky, resin-coated floor. Desperation is a hell of a motivator. As soon as his fingers touched my skin, I jerked my head to the side, causing him to stumble. It wasn't much, but it bought me a few seconds, just enough to tip the chair and send us both crashing to the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but it also loosened the ropes around my wrists. My hands were bloody and raw, but I didn't care. I clawed at the bindings, ignoring the butcher's laughter as he got back to his feet. Oh, you're feisty, he said, his voice almost gleeful. I like that. It makes the end result so much more satisfying. My fingers found the shard of glass, slick with resin, and I gripped it tight. He lunged toward me, but I swung the shard up just in time, slashing at his arm. He hissed in pain, stumbling back and clutching the wound. His blood, dark and thick, dripped onto the floor. You little shit, he growled, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. I didn't wait for him to recover. Still bound to the chair, I rolled onto my side, slamming the edge of the glass against the ropes. The fibers frayed and snapped, and within seconds, my hands were free. The butcher was already advancing, a long knife gleaming in his hand. I grabbed the lantern from the table and hurled it at him. The glass shattered on impact, and flames erupted, licking hungrily at the resin-coated decorations hanging on the walls. The butcher screamed, a mix of rage and surprise, as the fire spread, consuming his twisted creations. I didn't stop to watch. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning resin. I crawled toward the stairs, dragging my useless legs behind me. Every inch felt like a mile, but I kept moving, my vision swimming as the fire roared louder and hotter. The butcher's screams echoed behind me, furious and incoherent. I didn't dare look back. Finally, I reached the stairs. My arms trembled as I pulled myself upward, one agonizing step at a time. When I burst through the door into the snow-covered woods, the cold air hit me like a slap to the face. I collapsed into the snow, coughing and gasping for breath, the icy flakes melting against my overheated skin. The cabin behind me was a raging inferno, the flames clawing at the night sky. I wanted to feel relief, to believe it was over, but deep down I knew better. The snow crunched beneath me as I crawled toward the road. My legs were still useless, but adrenaline pushed me forward inch by inch. Eventually, I saw headlights in the distance, cutting through the dark. My heart leapt. I collapsed onto the icy pavement, waving my arms weakly as the vehicle approached. The lights grew brighter, closer, and I allowed myself a shred of hope. But as the van pulled to a stop in front of me, that hope died. The driver's door creaked open, and I heard the sound I'd been dreading: bells. Faint, discordant, jingling softly in the frigid air. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No, no, no." A shadow loomed over me, and the last thing I saw before everything went dark was the butcher's gaunt face, smiling down at me. Epilogue: a new ornament. The family found the ornament on their doorstep the next morning. It was wrapped in festive paper, tied with a neat red bow. When the father unwrapped it, he frowned, his brow furrowing as he held up the bloody glass ball. A tag dangled from the ribbon, handwritten in elegant script. Evan Ross, 2023. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.